It was 3 in the morning when I heard them shouting. Doors slamming, voices from my neighbor's house, loud and raw, tenants yelling, the landlord pleading, a confused silence outside. For a second, I thought I was dreaming. Then I realized that chaos had my name written all over it, because I had turned off the water. I hadn't meant to wreck anyone's life, but sometimes justice doesn't come in the shape you expect. This is the story of how one man's greed, one tiny theft, and one simple flick of a valve destroyed a life, and how I watched it happen, quiet as a storm. If you love stories where karma finally learns to walk, hit that like button. If you've ever had a neighbor who thought your property was communal or someone who crossed a line you wouldn't stand for, this one is for you. Stick around. This is long. This is patient. And by the end, you'll understand why sometimes the best revenge is silence mixed with a little engineering. When you buy a house in the city, you expect things. Paperwork, a walkthrough, maybe a few squeaks the previous owners forgot to mention. What I didn't expect was the feeling that the house had been waiting, like an animal that had been caged and finally let out. I bought a place in the middle of the capital, a real bargain. The previous owners were family friends who urgently needed cash. They hadn't lived here in almost 3 years. They left the renovation halfway through. The main door? Locked with a padlock. The gate? Non-existent. The house looked like a secret someone forgot. Moving day felt like stepping into someone else's story. I brought my 3 dogs, a pile of boxes, and a stubborn optimism that this fixer-upper would be mine in the best way. First day, I walk into the garage to find a bike parked like it belonged. Somebody's easy assumption. Empty house, free space. I moved the bike onto the road and put up a gate that same afternoon. Later that evening, an angry man stands banging on my new gate, trying to get his bike back. I don't answer. I watch through the glass as he sulks away after 15 minutes, bike in hand. That moment, small, petty, should have told me everything I needed to know about the neighborhood. People assumed vacancy meant permission. People thought abandoned meant available. That first day, the tilt of the neighborhood's head toward me was already hostile. But I'm a big guy. I have 3 dogs. I figured I'd handle whatever came. I'd learn the rhythms, make the connections, and eventually, maybe, fix the place up like I planned. A week passed. Little things. Neighbors parking in front of my gate, delivery drivers ignoring no parking signs, became the new normal. Then, during a shower, I noticed the water pressure drop. Not a trickle, just thinner, like someone had turned down the volume on something that should be loud. Out in the street, through the thin wall, I could hear a water pump kick on next door, a familiar mechanical whining. The house next door had 3 stories. The owner lived on the ground floor and rented the upper 2 floors. The tenants used a pump to lift water to rooftop tanks. At 3 stories, the municipal pressure simply wasn't enough. Coincidence, I thought at first. Pumps run, pipes breathe. But the pattern landed in my gut like a pebble tossed into still water. I waited until the pump turned off, then ran to my taps. Pressure back to normal. Waited some more, the pump came back on, water thinned again. I started charting it. When the pump ran, my pressure dipped. When it stopped, I had water again. This is the moment where a man has to make a choice. Confront, call the law, or set a trap. There are moral lines that some people think are black and white. But life? Life is full of gray. The bills for this place had been oddly high over the years it sat empty. There had been leakage, sure. Old houses leak. But those bills didn't add up for leaks alone. Now looking at the situation through a fresh lens, everything clicked into a cruel little puzzle. What if someone had been siphoning water straight from my supply while the house sat empty? What if for years my water had been feeding someone else's roof tanks? I could have knocked on his door. I could have demanded an explanation. I could have made a scene. But there's something I want you to remember about me in this story. I'm stubborn, and I like clean solutions. If someone is taking from me, I don't want to trade punches. I want to finish the fight in the smartest way possible. Audience question: if your neighbor was stealing from you, confront now or plan? Pause for engagement. Let me tell you about the neighbor. An old man, retired mechanic, set in his ways. Bitter, thin with worry lines that don't go away. He loved that the house had been empty. He blamed the previous owners the moment the sale happened. He told them, in no uncertain terms, that he wasn't thrilled with strangers moving in. He had the kind of personality that tolerates things only when he profits from them. He'd resentful muttered, he'd walk by my gate acting as if the world owed him something. The thing with people like that is that small injustices look like rights. An empty supply pipe looked like free water. A silent meter read as permission. Now, I want to be clear. The water he'd taken from my supply didn't cost me millions. In my country, water is cheap. My total monthly bill, even after washing 3 animals and a weekly car wash, was about $5. The money itself wasn't the grievance. That's important to understand. This wasn't about economics. This was about principle. The brute, ugly kind. People who take what isn't theirs because they think they deserve it. That is a principle worth defending. For a few days, I sat on it. I tested the pressure at odd hours. I timed pumps. I watched him walk past the gate with a certain arrogance, the kind that says, this world owes me something. I debated all the usual hammers. Call the cops, have a confrontation, or go legal. But 2 things pulled me away from those obvious options. 1, I didn't want to live next to someone who'd be constantly resentful knowing I'd reported him. Escalation breeds ugly responses. 2, I like the idea of a clean solution, something that didn't involve yelling under a street lamp or a lawyer's letterhead. I wanted a lesson that hit where it hurts, something that threatened income, pride, and the fragile infrastructure that keeps small-time landlords afloat. So, I took a step back and looked at the system. The rooftop tanks he used had a ball valve in the tank. When the tank is low, that valve stays open, signaling the pump to run. The pump runs until the tank's level rises. The ball valve clicks closed, and the pump shuts off. If the tank never fills, if the valve never gets the signal, then the pump runs until something gives. The pump draws power, it heats, old wiring gets stressed. Overload, burnout, fuse trips. And if the wiring is already old, thin, likely original when someone thought light bulbs came in a single wattage, the constant draw from a starving pump overloaded the circuits. Fuses blew, wiring overheated. Something sparked. That's the kind of domino you can't unring.
At around 3 in the morning, it started. At first, it was a low, persistent whine. Then a pop. Somewhere inside his walls, an electrical sound like a small gunshot, a wire surrendering. Then, the house went dark. People get loud and ugly when the essentials go. Power and water are the backbone of modern comfort. Tenants banged on doors, in pajamas, voices rough with sleep and anger. I could hear the landlord's voice, thin with panic, trying to placate, trying to explain. They demanded answers. Why only our house, they asked. Did you cut the power, they accused? It's a terrible electric moment to be accused of something you can't legally do. You can't cut another person's power lines. That's a crime. But telling people their wiring has failed and that their pump burned out is an entirely different and legally sound explanation. They had to call in an electrician. Someone had to fix the wiring. The tenants were furious. Tenants are not patient when it comes to essentials. They asked to be refunded. They wanted to move. The landlord, who'd been living on their rent, suddenly had excuses that sounded thin. He could repair the wiring eventually, but the cost, the fines the city assessed for unsafe wiring, and the fury of the tenants became a perfect storm. Within 48 hours, both tenants packed up. One left immediately when they were told restoration wouldn't be that day. The other didn't last long. Their income evaporated. The landlord's delusions of control collapsed into math. Fines, $500, refunding security deposits, legal liabilities for a property deemed unsafe. That $500 fine is massive where I live, not pocket change. He couldn't keep the house afloat without rent. His visits to my gate now had a different scent. Desperation. He came by a few days later, shoulders hunched, asking, almost pleading, if I'd turned off my water. I said, deadpan, "Oh yeah, I had a leak in my tank. Turned it off till the plumber could come." I kept my voice flat. I wanted to see the look. That tiny combination of shame, calculation, and belief that the world had finally caught up to him. Unsettling. He kept his face straight. He said, "Oh, okay," and walked back inside. His expression tried to hold dignity, but the lines around his mouth had changed. He was a man who just smelled his own ruin and had returned to the thing that destroyed him because he had nowhere else to go. I got a plumber lined up for the next week. We were going to fix my pipes. I was going to remove any cross connections leaving my property. Legally, I had to. Morally, I wanted my house to be above reproach. The truth is, I felt a cold satisfaction, like someone who watched a greedy spider step on its own web and get trapped. There's a strange moral calculus in stories like this. I set out to teach a man a lesson about boundaries. I did not set out to ruin a life. Call it poetic justice or call it cruelty. It depends on your tolerance for passive consequences. The man had been stealing from me for years, likely convinced he deserved it. I gave him a consequence in proportion to the theft and his willingness to risk tenants' comfort to keep saving his pennies. The tenants lost trust, left, and the landlord lost income. He moved out on Sunday to his daughter's house, beaten by math and embarrassment. But here's what I keep thinking about at night. Two things. First, justice isn't always a courtroom drama. Sometimes it's mechanical and quiet. Sometimes it's a pump that runs dry and a fuse that blows. Second, revenge, no matter how cleverly executed, leaves fingerprints. Mine were subtle, a turned-off main, a plumber appointment, a story about a leak. But they were there. If he had found a way to prove I'd maliciously targeted him, if he had evidence of intent, he might have come after me in court. Luckily for me, actions that fall under legal sanction tend to require direct malicious acts. Turning off your own water? That's legal. I didn't gloat. I didn't post photos. I let the consequences unfold. Watching him tally his losses in silence was my catharsis. And that's the dangerous part of it all. Watching someone self-inflict chaos by trying to take advantage of the system. There's a moment in every revenge story where the protagonist breathes. The moment where the tension that had wrapped around your chest all this time finally unwinds. For me, it wasn't in the shouting at 3 a.m. It wasn't in when tenants slammed doors and walked away. It was later, sitting on my veranda with my dogs asleep at my feet, listening to the neighborhood exhale. The man who had tried to steal my water was moving out. His tenants were gone. The wiring bill would be paid, the fines would be paid, and he would go live with his daughter because pride couldn't carry him forward anymore. I felt a lightness I hadn't expected, not pleasure so much as relief. The relief of a boundary being reestablished. He couldn't take from me anymore. He couldn't treat my home as his reservoir. He had to face the real-world consequences of an entitlement that had no defense. If there's a moral to this story, it's not be cruel, it's not get even, it's this: boundaries matter. And patience can be a weapon if used ethically. I didn't go out to cause harm, I went out to stop harm. And in doing so, I let the natural consequences of his choices do the rest. Sometimes the universe handles people for you if you arrange the room and step aside. If you ever find yourself in a situation where someone is quietly taking advantage of you, you don't always have to shout. You can plan. You can use the system's own logic to expose the theft. You can push back in ways that are legal and effective. That doesn't make you a monster. It makes you someone who refuses to be exploited. If this story satisfied your thirst for karma, do the thing. Like, subscribe, and tell me your best revenge story in the comments. I read every one. Tell me, would you have done what I did?
Would you have knocked on his door and asked for a refund? Or would you have waited, smiled, and pulled the valve? Either way, remember this. Sometimes the quietest answers are the loudest lessons.